Hello, everybody.
Hello, Rabbi. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. Thank God. We'll get started in about a minute.
Okay.
But
You know that course that you took on extra on
yeah,
Israel with the 12th graders with Matt Goldish?
yeah,
He is a wonderful teacher. Dwayne and I learned in a class with him like 20 years ago with the Florence Melton Adult School.
yeah.
He's
I know.
tremendous.
Yeah, I know he's been very involved with Melton back in the day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a great teacher, really good teacher.
Actually, on a different topic, Rabbi, I couldn't believe you picked this particular subject for tonight because I have a number of yard sites in this month of Adar, and it's always been a concern for me as to which month to observe them. And years ago, some people who should know these things advised me that I should observe them in Adar too, because that's the month where Purim is observed. And then a week ago, tonight, 1 week ago, I missed out on a shiur from a rabbi I try to listen to when I can, and the topic was identical to yours tonight. And I contacted him afterwards, and I asked him, told him how sorry I was to miss out on it because it's a question that's bothered me for years as to whether I'm doing the right thing or not. And he gave me a kind of 3 sentence summary of his talk, which I won't introduce right now because you may have a different point of view, and I don't want to muddy
No, you're,
waters.
you're totally fine. You're totally fine. So I actually have set up for this to be basically a two-parter. Tonight I wanted to go back and try and get the core foundation of the conversation. And then the two topics that I was actually saving for next week were yard sites and bar mitzvahs, because the two of them each have some fascinating, interesting cases that deal with this very question. And I think they actually cut in opposite directions, but we're not going to deal with yard sites tonight, but the plan is to deal with them next week.
Yeah, I couldn't be happier with the choice of topic. I was even contemplating during the week suggesting it to you, for my own purposes, if nobody else's.
Understood.
So thank you. I'm very glad you picked it.
Okay, good. And the truth is we might end up going back to Shemitah at some point, but I was having a lot of trouble just wrapping my head around a couple of things, and just everything seemed to just, like I said a couple of times, it never seemed to go straight. Every time I was preparing something, I had to go back to certain basics that I just didn't have background in. My hope is actually that after when I get through Mishnah Yomi and I do Masechah Shvius, that I'll have certain knowledge-based background that will prevent me from stumbling too much over some basics that were part of my problem with Shemitah. Because again, not living in Eretz Yisrael, it's not an area that I deal with too often. And so some of my just general knowledge is not where it should be. So, but we'll come back to it. I think it's an important topic and I need to learn it myself anyway. So, but for now, we're going to jump into tonight's topic, which is Adar Aleph and Adar Beis, the status of the leap year month, and trying to figure out which month is the leap year month. And what I want to show tonight is that there's a range of opinions in over the course of the medieval scope. And I want to try and highlight basically what I see as three positions. Generally speaking, most people present this as two positions, but I came across a Tosfot that we'll actually open with that I think is actually a third position in the debate. And the reality is that, right, you can skin this cat in basically three ways, right? If I asked you which Adar is the true Adar, Adar Aleph or Adar Beis, the answer could be Adar Aleph, Adar Beis, or both. I mean, I don't think you can really answer neither. I don't think that one really works, but I'm pretty sure there are three possibilities, and I want to try and highlight where I think those possibilities come from. And then I'm going to deal with some of the basic halachot that stem from this conversation from the Mishnah Berurah. It's actually the very last siman of the Shulchan Aruch, deals with Adar Aleph, Adar Beis, And then my hope is that next week we'll spend a full session dealing with two conversations, yortzites and bar mitzvahs, or bar and bat mitzvahs. And we'll try to get into some of the mechanics of how the Jewish calendar works to some extent, which is a fun one. But before we even jump into the source sheet at all, one interesting note is that there's a often quoted Ramban, Nachmanides, on this topic that talks about, it's in Parshas Bo. It's on the psukim for HaChodesh HaZalachem, which is considered the first mitzvah commanded to the Jewish people in the Torah. And the Ramban there says that there is basically a mitzvah to refer to the Jewish calendar as kind of the date, right? So when we say Hayom Yom Rishon B'Shabbat, and when we use the Jewish calendar, that is all a kiyum, a fulfillment of the mitzvah of referring to the Jewish calendar. Now, there's a whole interesting conversation in history about the months themselves, but generally speaking, when you go back to the Torah, the names that we call our months are not the names that are used. In the Torah, the way that it works is when we were freed from Egypt, Nisan became the first month. And every other month is the next month after that, all counting after the Geula. Meaning the Geula, the redemption from Egypt, is the starting point, and every other subsequent month leads you back to remembering the miracles of the Geula. The Gemara says that after the Jews left Babel, they took on the names of the months that the Babylonians used, and the reason was because the Jews had survived Babel, and so they wanted to highlight that it was now they had kind of graduated from the Egyptian remembrance, and now they were highlighting that they survived the exile in Babel as well, and so they took on that those names as well. So it's interesting, kind of how we got to where we are today. But that's just a little bit of a background about, excuse me, the months in general. Now, why I start there is because when you think about it, if the months are considered numbers, right? So then to understand the last month as being at all connected to the 12th month, to the month that normally was the 12th month, is odd, right? If I were to tell you that you have the first month, the second month, the third month, etc., then you have the 12th month, and sometimes we add a 13th month. I don't know that anybody here would think that 13th month would be or should be somehow, right, the new 12th month, right? It's a little bit of a strange thing. I actually came across Rav Willig from YU. It's Rabbi Klayman's, or Rebbetzin Klayman's father. He actually argues that there's no 13th month. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then 12b. And that's how he understood it. And we'll see a little bit why that might be. So let's jump in to the various conversations that the Rishonim have, now that I kind of muddy the water a little bit with the introduction. So to start us off, we begin with a Tosfot from Sanhedrin, Daf Yud Beis. Where are you? Nope. There you are. Tosfot Sanhedrin, and again, kind of ironic, it is easy to remember. It's 12b. I just highlighted, right, 12a, 12b, but Sanhedrin 12b. And the Tosfot says, Ein mavirin ela Adar. So the question the Gemara is dealing with is, can you make a different month of the 12 months, the leap year month, right? Meaning, can you add a year, add a month in between month 7 and 8, or month 8 and 9? And the Gemara's answer is no, you can only add a month after Adar. So the Tosfot says as follows, and pay attention carefully. The chol shar hachadashim ein mavirin. You cannot ma'abrin. You cannot make them pregnant. Meaning you cannot add an extra month. Chsiv, as it says in the book of Esther, la chodesh shnemasar hu chodesh Adar, to the 12th month, which is Adar. So the point being that the month of Adar is known as the 12th month specifically. Ve'im avirin achas mishar hachodashim, and if you were to, right, add a leap year, a leap month into any of the other months, then the 12th month would not be Adar, right? Mishar hachodashim lo have Adar shnei masar, because if, let's say, you would have made an extra 4th month, then when you got to the month of Adar, it would have been the 13th month instead of the 12th month. And so because the pasuk says in Esther that the 12th month is Adar as a definitive statement, and that's never, right, again, in a 19-year cycle, we have 12 non-leap years and 7 leap years, right? I think it's like 3, 4, 6, and then it skips a little bit, and I think it's like, I think 19 and 18 are both leap years, but whatever it is, there's 7 years of the 19-year cycle are leap years. So the point is, again, because the pasuk has in one place both calling Adar the 12th month and the name of Adar, so if you made any other month the extra month, then Adar would be the 13th month. So if you're just reading this Tosfos, I believe this Tosfos seems to think that if you had to mark which month, the Adar Aleph or Adar Beis, which is the real Adar, what would you say based off of this Tosfos?
Adar 1.
Adar 1, the 12th month, right? There's a fundamental definition based off the psukim in the book of Esther that the 12th month is Adar. The 13th month is the leap month, but that's not the real Adar. We call it Adar Beis, but it's the leap month. That would be the simplest explanation for this Tosfos. However, the main conversation that people have around this topic really stems from a Mishnah in Megillah. Megillah Daf Vav Amud Beis, Tractate Megillah 6b. And the Mishnah says as follows. And we're going to see basically 2 ways of reading this. Karo es Megillah ba'adar harishon. Let's say you read the Megillah on the 14th day of the first Adar, because you thought that was Purim. And then after you celebrated a full Purim, you had the whole thing, right? You did everything. You drank, you had your meal, the whole thing. Later that month, Nisabra Hashana, the Beis Din decided, you know what? We're going to add another month. Because before the calendar was set, this could happen, right? They could add the extra month all the way until the last day of Adar Aleph. So until Nisan started, they could still add another month. So you celebrated basically the entirety of your Purim already. And at some point after your celebration, the Beis Din said, you know what? We didn't realize the seasons kind of are not matching up. So we're actually going to add an extra month now. So now what? So the Mishnah says, even though you basically celebrated the entirety of your Purim in Adar Rishon, nevertheless, you're going to have to reread the Megillah in Adar Sheni. Now, what seems to be, right, the emphasis here is that if you were going to be highlighting what's the more important, right, month, if after already doing a full Purim in Adar Rishon, you're going to have to redo the Megillah in Adar Sheni, that sounds like, right, what's the real month of Adar?
Eight.
Right, base, exactly, the second one. The second Adar. Very good. Now, we're going to see, there's 2 ways of reading this Gemara, or the Mishnah, and we have to read the second half in a second, because we're going to see, you can read this either as they're both Adar, but one might be more-ish Adar, but they're really both Adar, or you can read it as really Adar Sheni is Adar, and Adar Rishon is really nothing when you have a leap year. So let's see how this plays out. The Mishnah continues, Ein bein Adar Harishon la Adar Hasheni, Ella Kriyas HaMegillah Umatanos Levyonim. Now, this certainly sounds like both of them are Adar, but the way that you read this is, right, Ein Bein Adar Rishon Adar Sheni. There's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar, with the exception of Kriyas HaMegillah Umatanos Levyonim, the mitzvah of giving presents to the poor and reading the Megillah only take place in Adar Sheni, but everything else, it sounds like, should take place in Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. Right? That's what seems to be the implication. We say there's no other difference except for Matanos Levyonim and Mikra Megillah. So everything else should follow. So let's see how the Rishonim read this Mishnah. So there's two readings. The first is the Rif. The Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. The Rif is one of the most important early Rishonim from Fez, Morocco. His work was reviewed by the Rambam as the major work that he based a lot of his psakim on. The Rambam claims that he only disagrees with the Rif in a handful of occasions. Those who learn the Rambam and the Rif think there's a couple more than that, but the Rambam himself seemed to have major deference for the Rif. And when the Shulchan Aruch came in Paskind, the general way that the Shulchan Aruch would Paskin was he would take the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rush, and would basically take the majority opinion of those three giants. The Rif is a major posek. He's referred to by the next generation of medieval commentators as the Shas Katan, the miniature Shas, the miniature Gemara, because the Rif took the text of the Talmud, took out all of the agaditas, all of the stories, all of the extraneous things from a halachic perspective, and focused in on the halacha psuka, the bottom line, halachic takeaways from the various Gemara. It says the Rif. Masnizin, Karu esa Megillah ba'adar rishon is Abra Hashana Koridosa ba'adar sheni, Ein bein adar rishon adar sheni ela mikra Megillah matalos levyon. So he just quotes the Mishnah. It says the Rif, Hadik Tani, Ein bein adar rishon adar hasheni, ba'arbasar kayma. So first of all, when we say there's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar, we're referring specifically to the 14th of Adar Aleph and Adar Sheni. V'hachi Ketani, this is what we mean. Ein bein arba'asar shel Adar harishon arba'asar shel Adar Sheni. There's no difference between the day of what would have been Purim in Adar Rishon and what is the day of Purim in Adar Sheni, except Mikra Megillah and Matanos Levyonim. Ha le'inyan hesped v'tanis zevazeh shavin v'chein hilchaza. But when it comes to the fact that we do not give eulogies or fast on these days, both in Adar Aleph and in Adar Sheni, that is equally true. Now, what the Rif doesn't mention specifically is Seuda, right, the meal, and Mishloach Manot, which is normally connected to the meal. Right, so Mishloach Manot and Seuda are often connected, and the two of them are not mentioned by the Rif. And again, we'll see how that plays out a little bit in the Ramah, a little bit. But the truth is, again, depending on how you're reading this Mishnah, I would have said that it's only Megillah and Matanos Levyonim that are different. In other words, you should have a Seuda on Purim, and you should have Mishloach Manot on Purim, even in Adar Rishon. We'll see how that plays out, though. But according to the Rif reads this Mishnah as there's a Reisha and a Seifa. There's a beginning section of the Mishnah and an end part of the Mishnah. They're two different things. The first one is just talking about what happens if you actually read the Megillah already. We're going to still make you read it again. And then it reinforces that the Adar Sheni is the main Adar, because Adar Sheni is when you would do Mikra Megillah and give the gifts to the poor. That's how the Rif reads this, the simple reading. In other words, for the Rif, both Adars are holy, but Adar Sheni clearly has the upper hand. Okay? Comes the Rush, Rabbeinu Asher, again, another very important Rishon, this time Ashkenazi in training. The Rush was a student of Marami Rutenberg, so he was trained in Germany, and he fled down to Spain after the Marami Rutenberg was thrown in jail, and his colleague, the Mordechai, was killed by pogroms. And so the Rush flees from the area, goes down south, and the Rashba finds him a job in the lands of Spain. The Rush is the father of the Tur, and the Tur is the forerunner of the Shulchan Aruch. So again, the Rush has a major role to play in the halacha that we follow today. I have mentioned before, the Rush is the third of the three giants that the Shulchan Aruch relies on, that Rav Yosef Karo relied on when writing the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Rush. How does the Rush read this Mishnah? He reads it differently. Mas Nisin. Karo es Megillah ba'adar harishon v'nis abra hashana. Korinosa ba'adar sheni ve'ein bein adar rishon adar sheni ela mikra Megillah matas tavyonim. Again, he just quotes the Mishnah at first. Then he explains. Nira, it appears to me, Nira Lomer appears to me to say, the Seifa, that the second half of the Mishnah, meaning the Ein Bain part, Aresha Kaima, is specifically talking about, it's a continuation from the Resha, the first part of the Mishnah. What does he mean? Hecha Dikara HaMegillah Ba'arba Asar, specifically in the case where you already read the Megillah on the 14th of what you thought was supposed to be Purim, but was in fact really Adar Aleph, and then the year as added a month. As at that point, Ein Bein Adar Rishon L'Sheni. Only when that specific situation happens do we then say that Adar Rishon has the status that is quasi like Adar Sheni. Except that, again, the Mikra Megillah and the Matos Avyonim are really only going to count in the second month. The Afal Pi de Asu Barishon, even though you already did them in the first month, you have to go back and do them again in the second month. Aval Kol Shar Hadvarim She'asum Barishon Veshuv Nisabra, but anything else that you already did, right? So let's say you had your Suda already, or let's say right, you already did Mishloach Manot, right? And then it got extended. You don't actually have to go back and redo them the second Purim in Adar Bet. And in the much more usual case for us, when the leap year takes place, we know it's coming well before Adar Rishon ever starts. And so we have no intention of having a miniature Purim where we actually do the mitzvos of the day on the 14th of Adar Rishon. As have Adar Harishon kimo Shvat. Then the first Adar has the same status as the month of Shvat, meaning it's not Adar. So the way the Rush reads this Mishnah is connected. It's like a run-on sentence. When do we say there's no distinction between Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni except for the need to go back and do Megillah and Matanos Avyonim? Only when the leap year was established after the 14th of Adar Rishon. But in a normal time, like for us who have a set calendar, we know when it's going to be a leap year, when it's not going to be a leap year, well in advance. Adar Aleph, Adar Rishon for the Rush is like Shvat. It's nothing. It's not. It's a different month, basically. The real Adar is the second Adar. That's the view of the Rush. So you have the view of the Tosafot, which is the 12th month is Adar. So which month is the real Adar? Adar Rishon. You have the view of the Rush that no. In a normal year, the real Adar is Adar Sheni. And then you have the view of the Rif, who's also the view of the Rambam, which is that when it comes to Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni, they're both Adar. They're both, right? You can't fast. You can't do a Hesped on the 14th of the first Adar as much as you can't do on the second Adar. But if you're going to choose of when to do the mitzvos of Purim, you should do them in the second Adar. The way that Rav Shechter kind of described it in Be'ikvei Hatzon is he said, look, on Pesach, we only have one day where we have a chiyuv to eat matzah. The first day of Pesach is the only day where there's a chiyuv, an obligation to eat matzah. And again, in Chutz La'aretz, we have the first 2 days because we redo the first day. But the rest of the holiday of Pesach, there's no obligation to eat matzah. that doesn't mean it's not Pesach. So he says in a leap year, according to this position, it's almost like there are 4 days of Purim, or I guess 2 days of Purim, right? You have the 14th and the 14th, and you have the 15th and the 15th, but you have the 14th and the 14th. But the reality is that you only perform the mitzvos, more or less, on the second iteration in Adar Sheni. That's kind of how he sees this view of the Rif. Okay, so how do we paskin on this particular question? So we kind of know this because we know that we're not celebrating Purim in like, when's Purim Katan? In a week, right? It's Zayin Adar today. So we know we're not celebrating Purim in a week. We got a little bit more time than that. So we know that we celebrate Purim in the second Adar. So it says the Shulchan Aruch. And again, this is Taf Reish Tzadi Zayin. This is the very last siman in the Shulchan Aruch of Orach Chaim. Yom Yudalad v'Tezvav Sheba'adar Rishon Ein Noflin Al Pneim. So on the 14th and the 15th of the first day of Adar, we don't say Tachanun. Ve'ein Omre Mizmor Ya'ancha Hashem Yom Tzara. You don't say Mizmor Chaf, the 20th Psalm, right, which we say in between Ashrei Nuval Tzion every morning in Shacharis, because the Psalm says, please answer us, Hashem, in a time of tzara, in a time of danger or need. So again, we assume that on special holidays or happy days, that it's not a yom es tzara, it's not a day of sadness or scared. We're not afraid. So therefore, we skip lam natzeach. The asr beheser detanis, and they are also right not allowed to have a hesped, not allowed to have a eulogy or fast. Right. So again, not having eulogy or fast, the Shulchan Aruch infers from that we would not say tachanun, and we also would not say lam natzeach. Aval shar dvarim ein noagim bahem. But the other things we don't do, meaning not only don't we do Megillah and Matanos Levyonim, but he seems to think we also don't do Mishlach Manot or the Suda. And then he says, V'yesh Omrim, De'af behesped v'tanis mutarim. So he has a Yesh Omrim, so this is a second opinion in the Shulchan Aruch. He says there are some who say that actually you can do a eulogy and you can fast. This is the position of the Rush, right? Again, the Shulchan Aruch normally paskins like the majority opinion. The Rif and the Rambam are over here. The Rush is over here. So one of his three makes it in as a Yesh Omrim, but it seems to be he follows, right, this first position, and he just brings the Rush as a secondary idea. And we'll see the Prima and the Taz, we'll see the Prima Gadim actually spells this out. Haga, the Rama, right, again, so Rav Moshe Isserlis, the Ashkenaz addition to the Shulchan Aruch, says as follows. V'minag kisvara harishona, we follow the first view. Yesh omrim shechayev laharbos b'mishta v'simcha b'yudaled sheba'adar. However, he says, there's an additional opinion that says not only do we not fast and not eulogize and not say tachanun and not say lam natzeach, there are some who say that you should actually actively try to laharbos b'mishta v'simcha. You should actually try to increase your eating and your joy b'yudaled sheba'adar rishon. In a week from today, says the Shulchan Aruch, maybe we should actually be celebrating to some extent. We should kind of pump up what we call Purim Katan, right? The miniature Purim of Adar Aleph. We should have some extra food and make it nice. Ve'eino agin kain, says the Rama, we don't have this minhag to go all out. Mikol makom, nevertheless, even though, right, he's quoting it and still saying we don't follow it, Yirba ktsas besuda. It's not bad to add a little something extra, a little something to your 14th of Adar Rishon. Why? So that your Yotze, even according to the more stringent people who think that you should celebrate a quasi Purim even the first time around. And then this is how he ends off his entire parish on Orach Chaim. Says the Rama, "Betov leiv mishta tamid." It's not bad to be enjoying your life and having a little drink here and there, right? It's not so bad. It's not so bad to be happy. You could, right? We can all be machmir to enjoy ourselves a little bit more, right? That's basically the Rama's point. We don't follow it la halacha, but it's not bad. It's not bad. We'll take it. We'll take it. So when you read through the Shulchan Aruch and you kind of follow what's going on here, they seem to, both the Shulchan Aruch and the Rama seem to be siding with the Rif, right? They side with the Rif that both Adar Aleph and Adar Beis have a status of Adar. Adar Beis seems to be the Ikar Adar, the main Adar. Adar Aleph still remains, right, contains the status of Adar, but we don't go all out, right? So we're not going to do Mishlach Manot and Suda, even though there are some who think you should. We're not going to go that far, right? But a little something to note that Adar Aleph is important, we're willing to do. Okay. And now just to play this out fully, the Taz, right, quoting the Pir Megadim, the Osrim behesped tanis, it's non ein bein Adar Rishon Adar Sheni, ela inyan kriyas Megillah, Matanos Yonim, v'daika hala inyan hesped tanis, zevazeh shavin, right? So he says basically, what's the source for this halacha? And he quotes our Gemara that we started with, or the Mishnah that we started with, and the implication that hesped and tanis are going to be not allowed. Vayesh omrim, he says the yesh omrim the Shulchan Aruch sfir le dezeh kai amashikasid bereisha sham karu megillah disabra hashana dezeh dafka him shavim leinin hesped v'tanis, right? And the yesh omrim, he says, is the Rush, it's the view of the Rush, who says that you should read the first part of the Mishnah into the end part of the Mishnah, that it's only true that we view this first Adar as a quasi Adar when you already read the Megillah before they made the extra month. Aval b'shar shanim, but in other years, milbaros that are have the extra month, shelo karo Megillah, but you did not actually read the Megillah yet in the first Adar on the 14th. Cholkin gambe hesped v'tanis v'rishon mutarim. Then, right, even hesped and tanis would be okay in the first month. It's like Shvat. Okay, that is the Taz's explanation. He basically connects our Shulchan Aruch back to the original source just to confirm what you probably already understood. A couple of more highlights before we summarize and close. The Mishnah Brura has a couple of more little pieces that he adds. So he says, in the first Adar, we all agree, L'kuli Alma, Ein Omrim Al Hanisim, right? You would not say Al Hanisim on the 14th of Adar, right? You would not, because again, it's not really Purim, it's only quasi Purim, right? It came in the Inkar Megillah. Since we're not reading the Megillah, we're not going to say Al Nisim. Says the Mishnah Berurah though, V'im Amru, let's say you didn't realize, and you, by mistake, you said Al Nisim after your meal or in your davening on Purim Katan. Ein machzirin oto. We're not going to make you repeat Shemona Esrei, because even though you shouldn't say it, if you did say it, it's okay. It's okay because it's quasi Purim, so we're okay with it. Ya'anecha, right? So this is talking about the right, that we skip Lam Natseach. So he said Ein Omrim Keler Chapayim, the Purim Katan. We also don't say Keler Chapayim, which is when we take out the Sefer Torah. Because whenever you don't say Lam Natseach, you also don't say Keler Chapayim. It's just good knowledge in general. When we skip one, we skip the other. It's good to know. So there were some of the minhag that the Mizmor la'asaf, that they also would not say that capital of Tehillim specifically on days like this. The whole yom she'ein omrim tachanun, any day that you don't say tachanun, they would also not say mizmor asaf. V'yesh mekom she'omrim rak b'yom halel, and there are other days that the only other places that only would not say mizmor asaf on days they did in fact recite halel. Ein omrim mizmor asaf. V'chein no, like in Frankfurt, okay. And also im chal purim katan b'Shabbos, if the 14th of Adar Aleph fell out on Shabbos, you would not say titkas chatzedek. Again, because that is also connected to Tachanun. So again, what the Mishnah Berurah is doing for you is connecting the dots, right? We now, I feel like people who come right regularly to Minyan, you kind of get a sense of how all these things work together, right? That when you don't say Tachanun, you also don't say sometimes Lam Natseach, and when you don't say Lam Natseach, you don't say Kelar Chapayim, and right how that interacts with the equivalent on Shabbos of Tzidkas Tzedek. All of these things are kind of related, but the Mishnah Berurah is just spelling it out for us. Now he says, Mish irlo nes ba'adar. Anybody who has a miracle happened for them in the month of Adar, the kibel alav lasos tamid yom mishta v'simcha, and they basically accept to make a sudas mitzvah, sudas hoda, thanking Hashem for the miracle. Im ira b'shana pshuta osa barishon. So right, so if it happens in a year where there's no leap year, obviously you do it in the first, which is only Adar. And if it happened in a leap year in the second, then you would do it in the second month. And again, that meal that you would be having is considered a sudas mitzvah, a meal that has a mitzvah component, because all su'udot that we do in order to remember the miracles of Hashem are considered sudas mitzvah. Okay, then you have the Mishnah Berurah commenting on the word tanis. So again, the Mishnah Berurah says, "Aval avelos." When it comes to avelos, l'kuli alma noheg ba'adar rishon. Everyone says that you should keep it in the first Adar, which is a little bit of some spoilers for next week. Im neder beferush lehisanos bepurim katan. If let's say you explicitly made a vow that you were going to fast on the 14th of Adar Rishon, so yesh lomar dechal haneder. There are some who say that actually the neder, the vow, does take root, even though it's against what you're supposed to be doing. Nevertheless, the have a rak minhag ba'alma, since the whole enterprise of this 14th is only a minhag, aval im neder bestam beis v'hei shel kol hashana yish lomar dedato hayelevad purim katan. But let's say you accept that you're going to fast every Monday and Thursday at the beginning of right, the first couple of weeks of a month, right, Bahab. So, and it happens to be that one of those days is the 14th of Adar Rishon. The assumption is that you never meant to include that. So it's only if you explicitly include it to fast that it might actually, the vow might actually take root. But if you just make a more broad vow, the assumption is that you didn't mean to include the 14th because it goes against this pretty strong minhag. Okay. Lastly, the Mishnah Berurah qualifies. So we say that the 14th is the day that has this kind of this connection between the Adar Aleph and Adar Beis. But the 15th, which is Shushan Purim, does not have the same impact. Even for walled cities, says the Mishnah Berurah, and I didn't see anybody talk about this. I thought this was a very interesting point. He says that for walled cities, right, Adar Rishon, the 15th, is not going to have the same status as for everywhere else. The 14th has in Adar Rishon. I don't know why, but I think it's a really interesting little point. Okay, and then lastly, Mikol Malkum Yarbe goes Tashbeitz Kasav Diyesh Laharbos Verabini. Right, so this is talking about the meal that you should add into it. So he says in the editions of the Tashbeitz, he writes that you should in fact increase the amount of food that you have. Rabbi Yechiel mi Paris, this is one of the Balei Tosfos, one of the Tosafists. Rabbi Yechiel from Paris, from mi Paris, right? A lot of the Tosafists were from northern France. That's where Rashi was from, not from Paris, from Troyes, but not too far away on the map. So Ragil Harbos Lahazman Bnei Adam, he would often invite many guests. V'zeu shesiyam harama v'tov leiv mishtav tamid, and this is what the Rama means. It's good to have, right, a little bit of fun, right? Jews just want to have fun, right? Hainu shetov laharbos l'chavad anes shenasa v'itim halalu, that it's good to add enjoyment to the miracles that took place. So I want to summarize, and then I'm just going to end with a coda, which begins to highlight for us that this conversation is still far from over. But what we saw tonight is basically, if someone were to ask you, what's the real Adar? Adar Rishon or Adar Beis? Adar Aleph, Adar Beis, right? Which one's the real Adar? You could say the medieval commentators seem to have a big debate about this. We have the view of the Tosfot from Sanhedrin 12b, which highlights that Adar is the 12th month, seems to indicate that for them, right, the real Adar is the first Adar. Then we had a whole conversation where the Mishnah itself seemed to indicate that we had a case where, again, someone read Megillah on the 14th of Adar, and then they found out that it was actually a leap year now, and that they added a second month. And the Mishnah concludes by saying there's no difference between Adar Aleph, Adar Beis, first Adar, second Adar, except for Mikra Megillah and the gifts that you give to the poor. And so we noted that sounds like there are a lot of connections. It's just not those two. And we noted two readings: the reading of the Rif / Rambam, which reads the Mishnah as two separate ideas, and the second idea is highlighting that in fact Adar Aleph in fact has a quasi status of Adar, just like Adar Beis. Adar Beis is the real bona fide Adar. Adar Aleph is a quasi status, but you still don't fast, you still don't say eulogies, and as we saw from the Rama later, maybe you have a Suda, maybe you do some sort of degree of Purim celebration, even if you're not going to do the Mikra Megillah, and if you're not going to read the Megillah and give your gifts to the poor. Then we saw the Rush, right? The Rush read the two parts of the Mishnah as connected and said it's only when you read the Megillah by mistake in the first Adar that you say that the first Adar and the second Adar both have status. Otherwise, in a normal year, first Adar is like Shvat. It's not Adar. It's just a different month. The real Adar is the second Adar. We then highlighted that the Pri Megadim quoted Nataz, right, basically reads the Shulchan Aruch, who paskins like the Rif and Rambam, even though he quotes the Rosh as a Yesh Omrim, and the Mishnah Brura, and the Ramah follows also this middle opinion of the Rambam and the Rif, that really both Adars have status, but it's only the second Adar that has the true status. But the Ramah goes a little further, saying that the first Adar, not only don't you fast and don't take tachanun, but you should also do something, right? A little extra food, a little extra seuda. And then we highlighted a couple of minor points from the Mishnah Brura. Number one, even though in the first Adar you should not say Al Anisim on the 14th, but if you did, we're not going to make you go back because it has enough relation to the day that it's a quasi Purim. It's Purim enough that we're going to allow you to say that. In addition, he connected it not only to Tachanun, he adds the Kel Chapayim and says that whenever you don't say Lam Natseach, you don't say Kel Chapayim. And if it happens on Shabbos, it's also true about Tzidkas Tzedek, right? So again, connecting all of those little dots together for people in Minyan for future reference. Fine, and then he made a couple other points that we'll hopefully come back to about Avelos and other things next week. I just want to highlight though with one coda this Gemara in Nedarim. So this Gemara in Nedarim is talking about a person who swears off drinking wine. Okay, so konam yayin, someone who says no more wine for me, and he says, right, she'eni toim l'shana, I'm not going to have wine for an entire year. Right, that's the commitment he makes. Nis'abra hashana. Okay, so he's making it through the year, and then later in the year, the Beis Din extends the year an extra month. So he said, I'm not going to drink wine for a year. Is he now held responsible to not drink wine for a 13th month? Or is he good? He did his 12 months, he's done, he can go back to drinking wine. Says the Mishnah, Asr ba uva ibura. He can't drink the 12 months or the 13th month. So it's the whole year, including the 13th month. Ad Rosh Adar. What say he says, I'm not going to drink any wine from now until the beginning of Adar. So Ad Rosh Adar Rishon. We said it's only until the beginning of the first Adar. Right? So here you see, right? It sounds like, right? When you say Adar, right? The assumption might be, at the very least, the first Adar is a Adar, right? The very least. Whether it's the main Adar or not the main Adar, not clear. But at the very least, when you say I'm not going to drink until Adar, well, as soon as either Adar starts, you're now in the clear. Ad Sof Adar, until the end of Adar. So this is more interesting. Ad Sof Adar Rishon. Here he says until the end of the first Adar. Whoa! So there's another source that seems to think that the first Adar is the main Adar, right? Kind of like the Tosfot, right? Because otherwise, it's one thing to say that the first that your Rishon, the beginning of Adar starts the beginning of the first Adar. I hear that, but to say that the end of Adar ends at the end of the first Adar, not the end of the second Adar, that requires a little bit of explanation. Why is that? Based off of this conversation in the Mishnah, the Gemara makes the following statement. Alma, we see from here, Stama, the Adar, the Kamar, Rishonhu. When we say just Adar, what we mean is the first Adar, right? What's the real Adar? The real Adar is the first Adar. Lema mas nisan, Rabbi Yehudahi. So we should say that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda. Why? The Tanya we learned in a Brisa, Adar Harishon. So if you're trying to reference the first Adar in a shtar, in a document, you write Adar Harishon, the first Adar. Adar Sheni, Kosev Adar Stam. If you're referring to the second Adar, all you have to do is write Adar, and people will know that it's referring to Adar Sheni. That's wow. That means that Adar Sheni is really the key here for Rabbi Meir. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, whoa, no. You scratch that, reverse it. Adar Harishon, Kosev Stam. If you're talking about the first Adar, you write it just Adar. Adar Sheni, Kosev Tinyan. You have to write the second one. Otherwise, people aren't going to know that, right? So here, again, there seems to be another debate in the context of Nedarim, which Adar is the main Adar. Now, I bring this up to muddy the waters, to just highlight that this is more complicated than I'm presenting thus far. I'm trying to give you kind of the model for how to think about this. But the truth is that the whole concept of this conversation in Nedarim is often dismissed from this whole conversation. And the reason it's dismissed is because Nedarim work based off of Lashon B'nei Adam. It works, meaning the way that we interpret vows is we try to understand what the normal person means by what they say, because that's how a vow works. We're trying to establish what are the limits of a vow, so it really depends on what people mean when they say something. But it doesn't necessarily establish reality, right? Just because people think of Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni as the main Adar doesn't necessarily mean halachically or legally that it has the actual status of the main Adar or the secondary Adar. So I introduced this only as a way of highlighting the murkiness of the whole topic, the question that it leaves, but I also think that it's actually not such a valuable source for answering the main question of which is the true Adar. For that, we'll leave it as a throughway debate, and we'll open it up for some more halachic halachically concrete cases for next week, focused on both Yortzeit, which is a minhag, as opposed to a bona fide halacha, but still a serious one that we need to know and care about. And we'll see, Rosh Hashanah actually takes it very seriously. And then also we'll talk about bar mitzvahs and all of the funny cases of bar mitzvah boys who are born in one type of year and have their bar mitzvah in a different type of year, and how it works if they're born in Adar Sheni or if they're how it all plays out, which month they do and perform and why and all that. And that's going to be a helpful exercise in trying to navigate this fascinating and interesting, complicated world of Adar Aleph and Adar Bet. I'll stop here for any thoughts or questions.
I just have a question arising from some confusion. I understand the first I think it was the Tosafos to point out, based on Masechet Megillah, the 12th month of Adar is the 12th month, and if you add another thereafter, it becomes almost an appendage given the same name, Adar.
Exactly. Yep.
Right. I understand that. There's a reason for them saying that. I don't fully appreciate why the second Adar is considered prominent, or the real Adar in some cases. Is it simply because it's a vestige of a time when the Rishonim added a 13th month out of necessity, and because it wasn't clear when that might happen, they wanted to avoid people facing the conundrum of I already celebrated Purim. What do I do now? And
Yeah.
so therefore, if it's pushed to the 13th month, there's no question. It's always the 13th month then.
So that's not, I mean, so the reason the Gemara gives, I didn't get into this Gemara, but the reason the Gemara gives as to why there's a potential preference for the 13th month versus the 12th month is the smichos geula legeula, that we want to connect Purim to Pesach, and that the juxtaposition of the 13th month to the month of Nisan gives it more status of being the month where redemption takes place. And so we're trying to connect the redemption, the biblical redemption of Pesach to the rabbinic edition of Purim. And so that is the main thrust of the reason, perhaps, why the 13th month gains more focus. I didn't get into that why question. I think it is an important question, but it would have taken too long to go through that Gemara properly. But that's the I think the reason behind the view of someone like the Rush, that basically just dismisses Adar Aleph as being relevant at all in most years, and saying it's like any other month. It's like Shvat. It's not Adar. But it's a good question.
That makes perfect sense, though. Thank you. Yeah.
So, Rabbi, just building on Mel's question, is that when in the Mishnah the Gemara talks about when they used to collect the taxes during Adar? Was it always during Adar Sheni?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's the same section or not. Why would that be relevant to this issue?
Well, because it has to do with the Bedek HaBayis, what it had to do with taking care of the Beis HaMikdash and all that. That which Adar would they go out and collect the taxes and go out and do the inspections and go out and do all that? Would it be Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni?
Right. So I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay. And then the second one would be also going according to Mel's ideas. Don't we have an idea, although, is if you have a mitzvah in your hand and the opportunity to perform the mitzvah?
That is the other view in the Gemara. That's you guys have basically just gone through that Gemara for me. The other view in the Gemara is that when a mitzvah baba yadcha al tachmitzana, don't let it yeastify, don't let it rise, right? Don't let it spoil. So that is the debate in the Gemara itself about whether or not to celebrate. Meaning, here's the reality. The reality is that everyone basically comes to the conclusion that we celebrate Adar. We celebrate Purim on the second month of the two. And the reason is because of the smichos geula legeula. The issue, though, is that that doesn't necessarily mean that it's because the second month is the main Adar. It's just meaning it's a second. The two facts are not mutually exclusive. Like, you don't have to say, therefore, the second Adar is the real Adar, right? Meaning, the conversation of why we celebrate Purim specifically in the second month is because we want it to be juxtaposed to Pesach. Now, does that make the second Adar the more important Adar? So again, I would argue that Tosfot that we saw in Sanhedrin would argue no. Just even they concede that they would celebrate Purim in the second Adar the main Adar is the 12th month, but we want to make our Pesach and Purim connected, so we do it in the 13th month. We do it in the quasi whatever second month Purim. But because I'm not just talking about the Purim question, I'm trying to set up for the broader conversation about other areas like Yortzeit or Bar Mitzvah. My initial buildup was more focused on the definition of the months as Adar, Aleph, Adar, Sheni. Which one's more important? Are they both Adar? Is really only one Adar? I think that's really kind of the more important setup.
So the questions on the taxes then remain. When would they send the tax collectors out? As early as possible and give them 2 months to collect the taxes and making sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to do, or just 1 month?
Right. So I didn't really see that in any of the things that I was working on because it's not a halacha.
So that's something we do today, right?
Exactly. So I didn't come across the Gemara when I was preparing, so I'm not sure. So I don't have anything to really add on the topic. But if I do come across it in my preparation for next week's class, then I'll certainly pipe it in then.
Yeah, so the 2 points of view then, as I see it, are not in any way in conflict with each other. One is the 12th month is the 12th month, and then the 13th is added to it. And the second is that to keep the proximity to Pesach, the second month has its own level of importance, hence Purim is in the second month. I mean, that's how I see it.
Exactly.
They're not mutually exclusive concepts or ideas or points of view.
Yep.
They're actually congruent in their own way.
So we'll jump into yours and Bar Mitzvah next week, but thank you all for tuning in and have a great night.
Yep.
Shakai, thank you very much.
Good night.